Hello and welcome back to another video. I'm Ukrainian and I'm here with another update on the Russia-Ukraine war. As always, I bring you the latest news and updates from the front line, so make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. In this one, I'll be covering the whole front line, starting out here in the north of the Luhansk region. We see here that the Ukrainian forces are attacking in the direction of Liman Pershi, as they still control patches of the forest line here across the river line. And they are trying to gain control over this settlement, as the Russian forces never really took control over the complete settlement. So they are trying to retake it and take control over Sinkivka as well, which will allow them to strengthen their defenses around Kupiansk. Further south in the direction of Kreminna, we see fighting in two directions, from southwest of Blushanka in the direction of Nevske, as Russian forces are trying to create a buffer zone between the village of Lushanka and the Ukrainian forces, attempting to take control of it and cut off the highway between Kreminna and Svatove. And then we see fighting in the forest line here to the southwest of Kreminna, as the Russian forces are trying to get control over the forest line, which will allow them to have a stronger flank when it comes to a possible offensive by the Russian forces towards Liman or a Ukrainian offensive towards Kreminna. As for the Siversk front, we see fighting continues in the direction of Bilohorivka, as well as Spirne, Vesele, Rostolivka, and Vasyukivka, as the Russian forces are attempting to take control over these areas and gain a better position on this front line, for them to have a stronger flank for when they advance through the highway from Bakhmut to Sloviansk, cutting off the forces in Siversk. Then we come to the Bakhmut front itself, where there's a lot of updates as always. The Russian forces continue attacks in the direction of Orihovo-Vasilivka as well as Bohdanivka, and it's very interesting because they have now reached the village of Bohdanivka, either from the south through the railways or from the north by the highlands here by the river line. Then we see fighting by the road itself west of Homove, which after the bridge blew up is not going to be very useful for either side. However, something that's very interesting is that the fighting continues in Homove. That means that there is two parts of the Ukrainian army. The one's going here to the south and most likely firing at Russian positions across. And then there's some Ukrainian forces here within the village trying to hold back the Russian advance. Then we see further south that withdrawal continues, and according to Syriac mapping or Syriac maps, the Ukrainian forces are withdrawing and withdrew from the eastern bank of Bakhmut, while the Russian army is continuing their mapping operations, trying to clean up any remaining Ukrainian forces across the Bakhmutovka River. And on top of that, the Ukrainian forces are withdrawing from the rest of the city, from secondary roads, after the Russian army got fire control over the main supply routes. So essentially, they are retreating from this final road that remains, this one. And they are doing it like a partial withdrawal, which means that they're doing it through time. They can't send out everyone at the same time, as that would just be suicide. So essentially they're sending some while the rest are covering for them, and then they continue with that withdrawal. That's why they also withdrew from the Bakhmutovka River completely, because that is furthest east and that is furthest away from the withdrawal route. So essentially, the Russian forces are trying to reach and cross these roads to be able to cut off the final road between Bakhmut and Chesev Yar by attacking and reaching this area here. So they have to cross through the east of Ivanivske or to the west of Homove to cut off this road. And that is approximately 3 kilometers westwards from the northwest, or 2.5 kilometers from the southeast. So this road is fairly far from the front line. However, if the Russians manage to take control over this road here, then they won't have that many issues cutting off the final supply route, as they'll just advance here from the south and through the road. While this road is the final road in and out of the city, it has to be noted that this is extremely muddy despite it being a road. And there are some videos of Ukrainian forces getting stuck in the mud with their armored vehicles. Because of how muddy it is in these roads, not in the fields, but in these roads themselves. And before you tell me that the fields or the road doesn't matter because both are muddy. The roads are still more stable and easier to drive through than the fields. The fields are varying levels of elevation and so on. It makes it difficult, while the road is very flat, which makes it much easier, but it is still very difficult to drive through them. So most forces we will see withdrawing from Bakhmut are most likely going to be on foot so far, depending on how the weather changes. And before I tell me it's March, it's not going to freeze again. It could. Essentially, there comes cold waves regardless of the season sometimes, and you can see snow in March or April. But there's also the possibility that there's just no rain and the sun keeps shining, then that will still toughen up the ground. Rather than freezing it, it will just be dirt, not muddy, which will make it easier for vehicles to drive through. Now, as for the north of the city, we see that the Russian forces continue their attacks here in the districts to the northwest of Bakhmut as they try to gain control over this residential area across the river line, which will allow them to have a strong flank here to the north, which will allow them to push with more strength here in the western southern direction of the city, rather than focusing on the residential area or the industrial area. As we see here, there's this large factory industrial area to the north of Bakhmut. So essentially going through this will be difficult. It will be much better to focus their forces on crossing this road and cutting off Ukrainian forces trying to retreat from the city. Then we see here to the east, the Russian forces continue their attacks as they attempt to take control over the eastern bank of the Bakhmut River, as the few remaining Ukrainian soldiers that haven't managed to retreat still has to be caught to not pose any threats to the Russian supply lines, and it will allow them to weaken their flank here as they will have a defensive line by the Bakhmut River, which will allow them to focus more forces to the north or to the south of the city. Then we see to the south of the city, the fighting continues here by the canal, as well as by the cemetery, and also by the parking lot here to the southwest of the city, as the Russian forces attempt to reach the intersection by the roads here southwest of Bakhmut. And they also continue attacks in the direction of the residential area here to the southwest. Gaining control over this area here will prove significant for bypassing Ivanivske if they plan on doing that. And then we see fighting here to the south of Ivanivske in the direction of Ivanivske, and also here to the western outskirts of the Russian zone of control, either in the direction of Stupushki or northwards towards Chesev Yar, where they'll try to cut the road and gain advances here in this area, which will allow them to push northwards in the direction of Chesev Yar, rather than even fighting in Ivanivske. Then we move further south away from the Bakhmut front to the Avdiivka front, where there's a lot of fighting reported here as well. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reports that there is fighting reported in the direction of Novokalilove, where the Russian forces are advancing northwards by the highway from Novoselivka Druha. They are also attacking in the direction of Krasnohorivka, as well as Kamyanka. So they're essentially attacking in three directions from this point of the highway, and they will try to gain further control over the highway, which will allow them better tactical control and better supply between Horilivka and Donetsk, as well as for a further offensive in the future in the direction of Konstantinivka, as they'll be able to bypass the defenses by going around from the southwest. We also see fighting in the direction of Avdiivka itself, as well as in the direction of Sheverine, as the Russian forces are attacking northwards from Vodiane in the direction of these trench networks to the north of the village. Then we see here in the direction of Vodiane, fighting continues within the village, as well as here in the direction of Pervomaiske, where the Russian forces are attacking from the northern flank, as well as straight through the city. Then to the southwest of this area, their fighting continues in the direction of Nevelske. And here to the Marinka front, we see fighting continues here to the north and the center of the city, as well as in the direction of Pobieda. And that is all for this update. Thank you for watching, and hope you all have a great day.